This is an important section where we are going to discuss about the project phases, project life cycle, delivery cadence, and development approach. These are all some of the important concepts, and normally these concepts are misunderstood by a lot of candidates. So watch and understand the difference between each of them. Project phases. Project phases are nothing but a collection of logically related project activities that result in one or more deliverables. Now, for example, a phase could be something like analysis, design, development, testing, deployment, or maybe maintenance. Now, these are considered as project phases. Don't confuse project phases with process groups. For example, later we will look at what is known as initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling and closing. Those are not project phases. Those are process groups. Process groups are different from project phases. Now we are talking about project phases. Now, if you combine all these project phases, that will give you what is known as project life cycle. The series of phases that a project passes through from beginning to the end is known as project life cycle. For example, here you can see that we start with analysis, we move to design, then we do development, then we do testing, we deploy, and then we maintain. Now, this is a typical software development life cycle. A project life cycle provides the basic framework for managing a project. And please understand that this project life cycle is industry specific. As I said, this particular example applies to software development life cycle. Whereas if you are doing a construction project, you may have a different kind of life cycle. If you are doing a pharmaceutical project, you may have a different life cycle. So let's see some examples from other industries. For example, construction project life cycle. This is a sample. Of course, again, within construction, there could be different kinds of life cycle. In this example, I start with a concept. From then I move to feasibility study. Then I do the preliminary design, then I do the detailed design, then I do procurement, construction, testing and commissioning, and finally I close out the project. This is a typical EPC kind of construction project. You may also have something like an ADDIE model. Now, what is ADDIE? ADDIE stands for Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate. Typically, learning projects use ADDIE model. An automotive project lifecycle could be something like this. So every industry or every kind of project may have a different lifecycle. Look at what is the project lifecycle you are working on. Now, a project lifecycle could be sequential. That means you finish one phase and then you start another phase. For example, here, design completes and then development starts. However, it can also overlap phases. Overlap phases means you do development at the same time simultaneously you do testing. There is some level of overlapping between the two phases. Now, which one to use? It depends on your project. What is the level of risk involved? What is the level of uncertainty? That will decide how much overlap you should have. Overlapping helps you to finish the project faster, right? It compresses the schedule by overlapping the phases. But of course, it may increase risk. So you need to see which is more suitable for your project. Now let's move to the next concept called phase gate. Now phase gate may also be known as phase review, stage gate, kill point, phase entrance, or phase exit. Different names are given. Now what is phase gate? Phase gate is nothing but a review held at the end of a phase. During this phase gate, the stakeholders may review the performance and progress of the project. And as part of this review, a decision will be made. Typically, the decision could be one of the 5 listed here. Maybe it may be a go, which means permission is given to start the next phase. It could be kill. Kill means we find after the review that the project is not viable. There is no point of continuing with the project, and we are going to kill the project. Or it could be a hold. Hold means project is temporarily suspended and may be revived later. Maybe due to financial constraints, or maybe due to lack of information, or maybe due to uncertainties, we may decide to suspend the project and we may revive the project at a later stage. Or you could recycle the project. What is recycle? We believe that the project needs a fundamental revision. Basically, there are revisions needed. So after making the revisions, probably we need to revisit the phase gate and see whether to continue or not. And then finally, conditional go. Conditional go means permission is given to move to the next phase subject to certain conditions. If you comply to certain conditions, you can go ahead. So these are 5 possible decisions that could come out of a phase gate: go, kill, hold, recycle, or conditional go. For example, let's take a project where, let's say, there are 4 phases. At the end of every phase, we may have a phase gate. For example, at the end of product definition, I may have a phase gate. Now, what do we do at the phase gate? We may look at what is the exit criteria for this particular phase. Say, for example, this exit criteria says steering committee approval is needed before proceeding to the prototyping stage. So at this phase gate, I will ensure that I get the steering committee approval for the definition of the project, and then I will move to the prototyping. At the end of prototyping, I may have another phase gate where the exit criteria may be the steering committee approves the prototype and business case before moving on to the detailed design. And at the end of detailed design, I may have another phase gate, which may say we need confirmation of final design from maybe the project sponsor. And then finally, let's say validation, where the product quality is demonstrated. Initial customer acceptance is obtained before moving further. So we may have phase gate, which acts as a review point to look at the project progress and performance. The next one is a very important concept, which is called development approach. Now, what is development approach? Development approach is the means or a way to create the product, service, or result during the project lifecycle. We discussed about the project lifecycle, but how do we achieve the various phases in the project lifecycle? You can use different development approaches. What are the available development approaches? We will look at that from a certain perspective of what kind of project work are we doing. You may be doing definable work, or you may be doing highly uncertain work. Now, what is definable work? Definable work is nothing but something that I understand very well. I have done similar projects in the past. The procedures are much clearer. Say, for example, constructing a house. Such projects are well understood. People have done similar projects in the past. So there is not much execution uncertainty. So we call that as a definable work. The work can be clearly defined. Whereas we may have highly uncertain work. Now, what is highly uncertain work? The work itself is exploratory. I do not know. I need to do some exploration. It was not done before. SMEs and business owners may have to sit down, collaborate, and find a solution. There is a possibility of high rate of change, complexity, and risk in the project. Now, what kind of development approach we can use for definable work? What kind of development approach we can use for highly uncertain work? Definable work, as you can understand, we can use predictive approach. As the name says, the project is much more predictable. I know what is going to happen. I know what is the outcome. I know what the output will look like. So I can use what is called as predictive approach, sometimes loosely known as waterfall approach. Whereas highly uncertain work, I may use adaptive approach. So either you can use predictive or adaptive approach. And you can also have something in between that is known as hybrid approach. Hybrid approach is something that borrows something from predictive, something from adaptive, and uses it. We will see in detail how hybrid approach works. If you look at from the left to the right, you can see that there is an increased iterative and incremental approach that happens. Typically, in predictive approaches, we have little iteration and little increments. Typically, we try to do the project on a single go. Whereas adaptive approaches use a lot of iterations and incremental deliveries. So you can see that as we go from left to right, the iterations and increments increase. So please understand, in a predictive approach, it does not mean they don't have any kind of iterations, they don't have any increments. No, it's not that. The level is very low. We don't do a lot of iteration, we don't do a lot of increment, but it doesn't mean we don't do at all. We do, but it may be at a lower level. Now, what is hybrid approach? Hybrid approach is something where in a single project, some portion of the project I may use predictive approach, some portion of the project I may use agile or adaptive approach. For example, here, the development I may use agile, the design part I may use agile, then the rollout can be predictive, or I can use agile and predictive simultaneously. For example, I may predominantly use predictive approach, but I may borrow certain concepts from agile like short iterations, daily stand-ups, retrospectives. I may borrow and use in my project. Or on the other hand, I may be predominantly doing agile, but I may borrow some of the concepts from predictive like work assignment, progress tracking. All those I may borrow from predictive. So that is also a hybrid approach. And then you also can have largely predictive. Your project is predictive approach, but within that one component, you want to use agile. You want to use an adaptive approach because it is a new component you have not done before. For that one component, you want to use an agile approach. That is also possible. On the other hand, your project is mainly agile. Everything is done agile, but one component which you want to outsource, maybe you want to use a predictive approach because your vendor may say, please clarify what exactly you want me to do. If you don't tell me exactly what I need to do, I cannot do this work. I don't have time to do exploration. Tell me exactly what you want, I will do and give it to you. So maybe the work you are outsourcing, you want to do predictive. So this is also possible. So these are the different approaches you can use in terms of hybrid. And hybrid sometimes is also used as a transition strategy. For example, if an organization is working in predictive approaches, but now they believe they want to move to agile. Now, overnight, you cannot switch to agile. It becomes extremely difficult. People may not understand. And suddenly, if you move, there is a possibility of a complete failure. So what you can do is you can start hybrid. That means you do predictive projects, but maybe borrow some concepts from agile approach. Or maybe you do predictive project, some components you try to develop through agile. So that way you slowly can transition from predictive to agile. So hybrid approach can be used as a transition strategy to change from predictive to agile way of working in an organization. Now, some examples here. Adaptive typically applies to software projects, research and development projects, and predictive or plan-driven or typically used in construction projects or projects with many physical assets. Projects that involve physical assets, it becomes slightly difficult to use adaptive approach. Or projects that are repeat, where I am very, very clear what to deliver. I have done similar projects in the past. Then also predictive will be much better. Hybrid, as we discussed, you may use when you want to learn new methods or techniques, or you want to move from one approach to another approach, or you have a mix of people with agile experience and predictive experience, right? You can have hybrid kind of approach. Now, I want to talk about uncertainty and complexity model. This is inspired by the Stacy complexity model. In this model, there are two parameters. X-axis, we have technical degree of uncertainty, and y-axis as requirements uncertainty. Now, what does it mean? Requirements uncertainty means what are we supposed to deliver? Are we clear about what to deliver? What is our level of uncertainty? That is, whether it is low or high. Are we clear about what to deliver? And then the x-axis talks about the technical degree. That is, are you clear about how to deliver? Y-axis talks about what to deliver. X-axis talks about how to deliver. What is the level of uncertainty in terms of how to deliver? Is it low or high? Now, based on these two parameters, we can look at which approach is better to use in a project. Say, for example, you have a low level of requirements uncertainty and low level of technical uncertainty. That means you are more or less clear about what to deliver, and you are also more or less clear about how to deliver it. The uncertainty is very low. Then the projects are considered as simple projects, and predictive approaches work well for these kind of projects. The next kind of projects I want to discuss is one of the uncertainties is higher. For example, the technical degree of uncertainty is higher, or the requirements uncertainty is higher. If one of them is higher, like for example, right, requirements uncertainty is higher, but technical uncertainty is reasonably low. Or on the other hand, requirements uncertainty is fairly low, but technical degree of uncertainty is high. Then in those cases, we call those projects as complicated projects. And for complicated projects, adaptive approaches work well. We may have projects where both requirements uncertainty as well as technical degree of uncertainty, both are high. When both are high, we call it as a complex project. And for complex project, again, adaptive approaches work well. Now, in case if both uncertainties are extremely high, then we call those projects as chaotic projects. It is suggested that not to start such projects until one of the variables are contained and they are in a reasonable level for us to handle. Until then, we should not take up the project because it is completely chaotic. Moving on, we will look at something called Agile suitability filter. Now, what is Agile suitability filter? You can use this tool to decide whether Agile is a suitable approach for your project. Now, this is how it will look like. It looks like a radar chart. In the radar chart, you can see that there are 9 segments, or basically 3 fundamental segments, which is team, project, and culture. And again, each of these 3 segments are further divided into 3 more segments. So totally we have 9 segments or 9 questions. And each of the question you need to answer. For example, access to customer. Does the team have access to customer? You need to ask that question. What is the level of access to customer? Do we have very low level of access to customer, or can we frequently access to customer? So depending on that, you are going to give a score. The score could be between 1 to 10 or 10 to 100, whatever, right? It is from low to high. So you need to give a score, and then we will be marking the radar chart. So you can see that the inner circle shows Agile, the middle circle shows hybrid, and the outer circle shows plan-driven or predictive approach. Now let's look at one example. This is one example. You can see here I'm using a tool. You can access this tool at suitabilityfilter.com. I have used suitabilityfilter.com, and then I have marked the 9 questions. For example, in my project, the access to customer is much better. So I am saying, yes, there is a high access to customer. So I have marked the answers, and you can see that the radar chart has been formulated, and you can very clearly see that Agile approach is much suited for this project. Most of the answers are within the Agile circle. Let us look at one more example. Here, let's say, right, the access to customer is extremely difficult. We cannot meet the customer regularly. Maybe I can meet the customer once in 6 months or so. Then probably, right, the access to customer is no. Then you can see that I have almost given 100. Approach buy-in, right? My sponsor does not like Agile approach. So that's also I have given 100. So you can mark the different questions again. And accordingly, now you can see the radar chart shows predominantly plan-driven approach. Yes, for some questions it shows hybrid, but predominantly I can see that it is recommending a plan-driven approach. So you can use Agile suitability filter. By answering the questions, you can find out which development approach is better for your project. Whether it is predictive approach, whether it is hybrid or Agile, you can find out. Now, delivery cadence. What is delivery cadence? Delivery cadence is nothing but the timing and frequency of project deliverables. How frequently are you going to deliver from the project? What is the frequency? What is the timing? How often you are going to do it? Now, we may have a single delivery. Now, single delivery means the delivery happens at the end of the project. You can see this picture. This is the project duration, and it is delivered at the end of the project. Now, typically, for example, you can think of, let's say, I want to renovate a restaurant. Now, ideally, I do not want a renovation to happen half in increments. It becomes difficult because I want to close down the restaurant, give it to a renovation company. I want them everything to be completed 100%, and I want to open it to customers at one go. Right? I don't want to do half and then open for customers. Customers comes, customers don't like, or customers goes through some difficulty. Then it will be extremely difficult for me to run the business. So maybe in that case, I want a single delivery. So that is called single delivery cadence. Or you may have multiple deliveries. You can see here in this project duration, there are multiple deliveries. Here you can see there are 3 deliverables. And they are not at equal intervals. They are at different times throughout the project. Say, for example, I want to develop a building security system. Now, when I develop a building security system for, let's say, an apartment, I may want to install CCTV. I may want to install a physical barrier to entry, right? Vehicles coming into the apartment, I want to have a physical barrier. Only after permission, the vehicles can come in. I may want to have access cards to access maybe the lift or apartment. I want to have an access card. I may want to implement app to regulate visitors. When the visitors are entering the apartment, maybe the security guard will get the details and then they will allow the visitors. Now, each of these can be done at a different stage. It's not necessary all of them has to be launched at one stage. Maybe I can install CCTV, and then I can do the physical barriers separately. I can subsequently do an access card. I can subsequently develop an app, right? It's either they can be done simultaneously, they can be done at different stages. It's up to you, right? So that is called multiple deliveries. You can also have periodic deliveries. Typically, Agile projects try to follow periodic deliveries where, for example, if you are following Scrum, you may be delivering at certain intervals. Say, for example, at the end of every 4 weeks, you want to deliver something. So this is a fixed delivery schedule. Maybe monthly or bi-monthly, we may deliver something. For example, a software application may periodically release deliveries. And then the final one is called continuous delivery. This is a new concept where the practice is delivering feature increments immediately to customer. We don't want to wait. It is done immediately to customer through automation. And you can think of examples like Netflix platform or Amazon, where they don't wait for releasing updates. And this practice is included in some of the several approaches like DevOps. Right? Some of you might have heard about DevOps, which is a combination of development and operations. Or there is a new concept called #no projects. They don't like projects because projects are temporary, whereas we are talking about continuous delivery. Right? Some of the products are continuous, right? For example, if I'm using Netflix, Netflix cannot define a project and then, right, stop it. It's almost like continuously it happens. Then continuous digital, right? DevOps, no projects, continuous digital. They are all talking about very similar approaches. They are all talking about continuous delivery of value to the customer. Now, this is delivery cadence. So delivery cadence can be single delivery, multiple deliveries, periodic deliveries, or continuous deliveries. Now, here you can see, once again, we can look at the frequency of delivery. Just now we discussed about the frequency of delivery. And then the degree of change, the amount of change that could happen in a project. So depending on these 2 parameters, which development approach is better? For example, if the degree of change is low and the frequency of delivery is also low, that means maybe like a single delivery, right? We don't deliver very often. The frequency is low. Then what do you think is a suitable approach? Similarly, if my degree of change is high, but frequency of delivery is low, right? I don't deliver very often. Then which approach is better? If I have a low degree of change in the project, but high frequency, very frequently I deliver, what approach it is? And then finally, high degree of change and high frequency of delivery, which approach? Now I want you to pause this video and think about it. Out of the 4, which one do you go into 1, 2, 3, 4? Okay, I hope you got the answer. Let's discuss. So low degree of change and low frequency of delivery, naturally, right? It should be predictive, right? Those are all simple projects, predictive. Now, number 2, where we have high degree of change, but low frequency of delivery. What is the approach? Typically iterative. We do a lot of iterations, but we don't deliver. Number 3, low degree of change, but high frequency of delivery. Very often we deliver, but not a lot of changes, which is incremental, right? We keep on adding more and more, right? We deliver small component, then another component, another component, another component, but there may not be a lot of changes. And then finally, Agile, which is more suitable when the degree of change is quite high, as well as the frequency of delivery also very often you want to deliver.